Well, today we are talking about the C70. I'm excited for this video. Let's get into talking about this camera. Well, hey, what's up? My name is Tony and I'm a filmmaker photographer in the St. Louis area. Today we are talking about the magical C70, Canon's newest small entry-level cinema camera, and we're going to kind of be comparing it a little bit with the R5 and the R6, but mostly what I want to do is just tell you some of the things that I really like about this camera, some of the things that I'm not crazy about, and then what is my plan in the future regarding this camera that I have been renting and Canon sent to me, and do I get rid of the R5 or the R6? What am I gonna do? So let's talk about a couple of these things. First off, let's talk about some of the things that I love, and I don't want this video to get too long. I've got some notes right here on the table on my iPad, so I'm just gonna be kind of referencing the list that I've put together because this can get really long and comprehensive, and I don't want to go through specs. This is just a real world kind of review of what this camera is like for a hybrid filmmaker photographer, somebody who is constantly doing run and guns and gimbal work and studio work, just kind of a blend of everything. So the first thing that I really love about this camera is the size of it. Now, I'm used to working with the C200, the C300. We've also got a couple C100 Mark IIs. They're a little bit smaller, but the size of this camera is just incredible. It's just a little bit bigger than a 1DX, but what I love about it most is that I can fit this in my Peak Design backpack. You don't need a lot of extra things. The only thing I have mounted on this camera is a plate for a gimbal. And so other than that, like, I don't put the top handle on because I don't need it. I don't put a cage on it because it really doesn't need it. It's just a really small, compact size that I really love that makes this camera unique from some of the other cinema cameras that Canon has released. Next thing I really love about this camera is the flexibility that is in such a small-bodied cinema camera. When I'm talking about flexibility, I'm talking about tons and tons of recording options. You know, you can shoot in HEVC, which I've been shooting in, which is the same as like the R5 and the R6. It's all 10-bit, 4K, lots of qualities. You've got the dual cards, and so you can use honestly, I've been using UHS 1 cards. They recommend V90, and that's when you get like the high frame rates and things like that. But if you want to buy this camera and then save up for some of those more expensive SD cards, you could use your SD cards that you have laying around, the V30s or whatever they are. So I have the higher, I think they're like the 170 megs. But anyways, lots of versatility when it comes to that. Also, with flexibility, you've got just an crazy amount of inputs for a camera this size. You've got 2 XLR inputs and a mic. So I'll use the wireless Go a lot with this just because it's a really tiny package and it just plugs right in. You don't have to mess with the XLRs. But if you want to record all 4 channels, you can plug in, say, like a phantom powered microphone. You can plug in another one and then a raw microphone, like a shotgun on top of this. Just lots of flexibility when it comes to audio, and the audio controls give you lots of flexibility too, because all you have to do is open up this screen and then they're right here. So you can constantly see it when you are filming. Very nice setup for flexibility. And while we're talking about this screen, this is another feature that you don't see on cinema cameras. Usually they're not connected at all, and if they are, like the C100, it just, this screen feels a lot more like 2020 opposed to the C100 Mark II, but that came out like 8 years ago or something crazy. So I love the fact that this screen is right here, just as if it was a hybrid camera. It just makes it very easy for me to get used to using a camera like this, coming from hybrids and jumping back and forth. Now, I do love the idea of having a disconnected screen that you can place on a cage or anything like that, but that's just not for this camera. I wouldn't even want that. I love the fact that the screen is built in and the way that it is, and it's not mounted on the back, kind of like a 1DX, but you can still get your really low shots or up high. I've done that before, especially on a gimbal. So you raise the gimbal way up in the air and you just pull this out and tip it down, and you can see what you're shooting way up in the air. Lots of flexibility when it comes to the body of this camera and a lot of the settings. So let's keep going. The next thing that I really love about this camera is the quality of the footage. Like when you're shooting on a hybrid camera, the R5, the R6, it's just not the same as shooting on a cinema camera. Even with the C100 Mark II that came out several years ago, that quality of footage, even though it's only 1080, it's just incredible. It's incredible to color, it's incredible to manipulate when it comes to low light capacity. Just the quality of that camera is really good. This one is way better. It just blows it out of the water. They put some technology in here that's pretty crazy. They put the same sensor, the DGO sensor, which is dual gain output, that's on the C300 Mark III, which is just an incredible camera. And we'll kind of compare those a little bit because I've used the C300 Mark III for a while for a shoot, and it just is a really good camera, which is spec'd very, very, very similar to this C70 with a couple differences. But anyways, quality of the footage, you get 10-bit, you have all sorts of different options that you can use on this camera. When it comes to coloring, it's just really nice. The blacks hold up very nice. I just really love the quality of the footage. A couple other things is that, like, this, I think the best way to say that it's just the features of a cinema camera dedicated for video are so much different than, say, the R5. The R5 has its advantages, but it's missing a lot of really key features that video cameras have. One of which is the built-in ND filters. All I have to do is just hit a button and I've stopped down so that I don't have to worry about overexposing my footage or sacrificing some of my camera settings because the image is too bright. I love having ND filters. I love having all of these buttons on the side of the camera that are dedicated to things that I need, like zebras and peaking and magnification and white balance. I even have these down here as an autofocus lock, and then right here I've got false color. You can just assign all of these buttons to whatever you want them as, and for the most part, they're in a really good place. I've just assigned a couple specific ones that I need in places that they're not. But for the most part, the ergonomics of this camera is just incredible when it comes to it. Another thing is that it's got an HDMI output that is clean. You can do all sorts of different things in the settings with this full HDMI output, which is very nice. A little bit different than the R5 and the R6. You're limited because that's not really what the camera is designed to do. Now, like I said, with the C300 is very similar to this, but it has actually two, I think, SDI outputs. One is for monitor, and then one is a straight extra SDI output of the camera that you can assign multiple different things. You can actually put a LUT on that output. You can remove, obviously, all of the on-screen displays, all of that kind of stuff. This one only has the HDMI output. Some of the complaints that we have about, say, the R5, the R6, when you hit record and your histogram disappears, those are all gone. Some of the things where, like, you can't view audio and like waveform or histo at the same time with a hybrid camera, those are all gone. You can see all of your camera settings that you need to see with a cinema camera, and that's one of the advantages of buying a camera with a C in front of it. You just get all of those features that are dedicated to video at the fingertips that will just make you a better filmmaker. Now, there's advantages to having hybrids, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in the future, but these are just some of the things that I love about this C70. It's an incredible, incredible unit. All right, Next thing I really love about this, and this is something that no other cinema camera has, and that is this mount right here. This is an RF mount. That means I can use all of the expensive lenses that I've bought for my R5 and R6 on this camera. And if I want to adapt some of the older EF or even cinema glass to this, they make an incredible adapter for it that actually makes it like full frame width. But the regular adapters, like the ones that I use on my cameras, work just fine. I've used this camera with the 85mm quite a bit, and also the 35mm f1.4, just because the glass on those two lenses are just so incredible compared to what I've found on some of the especially the 35. The RF 35 is not the best lens. It's good, but it's just not the best. So, yeah, RF mount, I just absolutely love that. And then the other thing that is on this camera that I haven't found on any other cinema camera that I absolutely love is the touchscreen menu on this screen. It is just completely different than other touchscreen menus on, say, the C200, the C300. With those cinema cameras, their screens are nice, they're really clear, I don't have problems seeing them, I don't need to add on a bigger monitor most of the time, unless I'm in a studio setting and I've got the ability to not move my camera, then I'll throw on an extra monitor. But this screen has a little button in the bottom left corner, and you just tap it, and that lets you get into all of your settings that you need to get to. So at the very bottom, you've got your white balance and your gain and your ISO and all of the things that you need instantly right there at the bottom. But then if you click on the top left, you can get into even more settings, your audio settings, your frame rate, your resolution, all of that stuff very, very easily. Kind of like the setup that Blackmagic had there for a while. I really like that workflow, but if you need to get into the deeper menu settings, then you can also do that through the regular menu button. So I just absolutely love that touchscreen control. So, and once again, coming from like a hybrid shooter where I love shooting on the R5, the R6 for video, the touchscreen on those cameras is just incredible. And I feel like this is a step towards that kind of incredibility. Is that a word? Incredibleness? I don't know what I'm saying. You get it though. Like, it is really stepping up that next level with the screen, opposed to some of the others like the C300 Mark IIIs, which is a good screen. It's just not the same kind of touch responsiveness that we see on this and other like cell phones. So that's all that I'm gonna say about that. But the touchscreen on this is really good. Now, I have heard of people having complaints about this getting loose and breaking. I haven't had any trouble with this. I'm pretty hard on my gear. I don't stick this in a Pelican case. Probably should, but it just goes in the top layer of my Peak Design bag. I just kind of flip it over and chuck it in there just like I do with all of my cameras. And I've never had any trouble with it. It fits in pretty nice. It's nice and form-fitting right up against, and I haven't had any trouble with the screens on these C70s. So let's talk about, there's so many more things that I love about it. In fact, I love this little mount that you can do a vertical video. I love the fact that the SD cards are up here. There's just a lot of ergonomic tweaks that they made on this camera that are just incredible, and I really enjoy it. I love the fact that it's got active cooling, so I don't ever have to worry about it overheating. It's just a really good camera. Now let's talk about some of the things that I'm not necessarily crazy about when it comes to this camera. The first one that I have found to be the most frustrating with this camera is that it doesn't have an EVF, especially outdoors, because the screen, although it's good, it doesn't work incredibly well in very bright sunlight. And there's a lot of settings you can crank up the brightness and the luminance, but it's still kind of hard to see. And then it starts messing with what's really exposed. And so then I'm having to get into like false color and really watch my waveform, which is kind of hard to see out in the sun. An EVF would take care of all of that. Now, I've heard of some guys making little boxes that go around this, and I'm sure that would help, but I just don't want to do that. I like to be able to just keep my camera really light and small and just kind of peek into the EVF every now and then. So that's just a tiny little complaint. It'd be kind of cool if they made a attachment that went on here that you could buy that would just add on an EVF, kind of what they've done with some of the smaller cameras. I think they did that with an M6 or something, where you just slip on the EVF and then you're good to go. That would be a nice little alternative to not having one at all. Other thing that I'm not very crazy about, and this is something that it's just in general part of having a cinema camera. Like, I am a hybrid shooter. There's so many times when I am filming, say an event or a wedding or a vlog, and I want to flip over really quick to photos and snap a couple photos, whether that be for a thumbnail, whether that be for just documenting it or Instagram. You just can't do that with a cinema camera, and that's one of the limitations that you have with a cinema camera that's dedicated to video. This is a video camera. There is no photos that you're taking on this thing. And like you say, well, why don't you just take a frame shot, you know, capture a frame shot out of your footage? The problem with that is your camera settings. Like, you don't want to have a high shutter speed for video. You want it at like 1/50th if you're shooting in 24 frames per second. And so with 1/50th, you get a lot of motion blur, and I just don't want that for a photo. So that's not really an option for me. Sure, it's really nice and crisp and clean, but it's not the same. Like, I just can't flip over to photo really quick. But that's just something that is like inherent with a video dedicated camera. You can't take photos. I get that. It's cool. Another thing that I've kind of gotten used to on my hybrids that this one doesn't have is IBIS. So lenses like the 50mm f1.8, the 85mm RF, like none of those have, I'm talking about the higher end one, the smaller one has IS, but none of them have image stabilization on the lens. So then I am having to stick this camera on my gimbal to be able to get really smooth shots. It does have digital IS, which is okay. I've used that a little bit, but I mean, essentially it does the same thing as warp stabilization in Premiere, so why not just use Premiere's warp stabilization, and then I don't have that warpy kind of footage baked into my image where I can add it in post if it will work. So IBIS would be really cool on this. Man, the body is just so small, I'm not sure how they would fit IBIS and ND filters, and between the two, I'd rather have ND filters. All right, let's keep going on. The next thing that I'm not crazy about that I prefer almost my hybrids with is that full frame sensor. Now, this has got a Super 35 sensor, which is a little bit smaller, and I understand why they do that. And honestly, there's a lot of cameras that still have Super 35 sensors when it comes to cinema cameras. The C100 Mark III, or C100 Mark II, the C200, the C300 Mark III. It's not until you get up to the C500 that is a full frame sensor on a cinema camera. That keeps the body smaller, and it's a look, and there's nothing wrong with it. But it would be cool to have a full frame sensor. I love that full frame look. I love the width that you get. I love the depth that you can get with a full frame sensor. And so when I jump on this, I find myself feeling just a little bit tighter or cramped when it comes to the image. Now, this is a fun fact. This is something that I do with my hybrids too. So this camera, when you're in the menu system, the quick menus, you can jump from like Super 35 to Super 16. And what that does is it punches in your image, which is very nice because if I've got a 50mm lens on this, I get that nice, you know, look. But then if I need a little bit more reach, I can punch in to Super 16, and that crops in just like if you were movie cropping on a hybrid camera like the R5. And so I will be doing that quite a bit when I'm using this camera for like live events or just need a little bit more reach on my lens. I'll use that Super 16 mode, and it works really well. So just something to kind of keep in mind there that you can do. And then really the last thing, and this isn't totally something that I'm not crazy about, it's just, it's not as good as the hybrids. And you're finding myself comparing to the hybrids a lot because that's what this is. Like, I'm comparing it to them because I love these cameras, and I feel like this is such a bridge between the R5 and the C300 Mark III. It's right in between the two, and so I'm kind of bouncing between the R5 and the C300. Anyways, what I'm talking about now is the autofocus. Now, the autofocus on the R5 is absolutely insane. It really is so good. And if you've got the EOS R, that one is good, but these are insane. And I love the ability that you can tap on something. So say it locks onto a subject's face, you can tap on something else and it quickly goes to that thing. It doesn't lock on the face. With this one, the way that I have it set up is only face tracking, which is really nice because what happens, say I'm doing this for Easter, I'm filming a service where there's a band up front and I'm locked on the main singer's face. If they turn around to look at the band or to look down at their guitar, what happens is if this camera loses their face, it locks the focus right there until it regains another face, which I really like. That works very well. But the problem is, if I want to like tap on the guitar to do a push-in, that I can't get off of that singer's face. I have to kind of reposition, reframe my my composition, and then once it's off of a face, then I can tap on the screen and reallocate where I want that focus to go. I just feel like it's a good autofocus. For the most part, it works really well. Last night, we were at a rehearsal kind of running through some things, and the face tracking was working even when they didn't have the lights dialed in perfectly. It's a pretty dark scenario, and it was still working really well. It's just, I feel like the hybrid autofocus is a better autofocus. So lots and lots of loves and things that I would change about these two, or about this C70. At the end of the day, this is an incredible camera for the price. Right now it's about $5,500, which means it's about the same price as my R5 and my R6. So which would I rather have? Would I rather have an R5 and R6 or a C70? Well, I don't think it's that easy. And in fact, I think for me personally, the R5 and the R6 work a little bit better for my style because I'm such a hybrid shooter. I was doing something at the airport here I guess that was last week, and they wanted me to get both photo and video, even if it's just a couple photos of, hey, you're a camera guy, can you just take a group shot real quick? And if I only had the C70, I have to say, hold on a second, let me put down the gimbal and grab my R5 off of my hip, and I'm ready to go. With an R5, I can just quickly switch it over to photo, take the photo, and I'm good to go. But as technology increases and as quality increases, as job sizes increase, you're gonna need something that's dedicated for a video specific camera. So there's lots of things that if you're jumping from, say, someone who has a bunch of friends that hire them to take photos and video, to now you're getting like business clients, you're getting corporate things, maybe you're doing weddings. This is a great next step to help you get to that next level of quality in both your end product, but also in your experience while you're shooting the event or the commercial or whatever it is. So I think that there's something to be said about this kind of a camera. If you're jumping to that next level, this is a perfect camera for that. Now, me personally, what I'm going to do, I'm holding on to my R5 and R6. I don't want to get rid of either one of those. And a lot of people have asked me, because they've seen me with this for like the past 2 months, like running around like, so what are you going to do? Are you going to sell your R6? You're going to sell your R5? Those two cameras have their place in my bag for specific reasons, and they're not going anywhere. If anything, I am actually going to start budgeting for 2 of these because, you know, why not 2? But first of all, like, I would love to get one of these just strictly for a gimbal setup. When I stick it on a gimbal, it's a perfect camera. The only time that I see the advantage of using, say, the R6 on the gimbal is in extreme low light, but then again, this camera probably does better in low light than the R6. I don't know, when it comes to the gimbal work, I'm using the RS2 now. This is a perfect match for that setup. And so I love the ability to have the R5 for photos, but this camera, when it comes to weddings, when it comes to run and gun, it just is really, really hard to beat. And so I do think that in the next year, I'm probably going to invest in at least one of these and then pick up a second one at the end of this year or next year to have in my kit. So at the end of the day, I'm going to have 3 cameras that are my personal ones, then I'm not renting those. And I know that's kind of a debate in itself when it comes to cinematography, but for me, I just feel like it's better to have my own gear ready to go whenever I want, and then I can build that into my bill to help keep developing my kit as a filmmaker. So that's kind of my plan. When it comes to the R5 for video, it really is a great camera, and it's making the image that I've always wanted to get out of a hybrid camera. I feel like with the EOS R, the 5D Mark IV especially, and then back into like the 80D, like that era, like I loved having the DSLR look, but it just wasn't as good of quality as the cinemas, and I feel like the quality has caught up with the R5 and the R6, that I can use that alongside with a C70, and so this camera could be a really good main A camera and then use these as secondary cameras. So I could do a 3-camera shoot then if I've got all 3 of these with just this setup and not having to rent a C whatever or use another one. So I think there's lots of advantages to that. All right, this video is getting super, super long. If you've got any questions about this bad boy, the C70, something that you want to see tested, something that you would like to have a question answered, like I've gotten really comfortable with this camera. Like I said, I took it to Africa. I took it, I've done weddings with it. I've done all sorts of run and gun event style at the church where I work. I've gotten a lot of time with this thing. And so if you've got questions, let me know. Otherwise, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And we are landing the plane on this video because it's super long. All right, guys. See you next week.